Russia's aggressive moves into Ukraine and global reaction to the crisis has created a sense of déjà vu. When considering the level of tension and heated rhetoric among Russia, its neighbors, and the West, you might conclude that the Cold War never ended. A recent edition of the National Conversation series posed the question, if it's not a Cold War, what is it? That's the focus of this edition of Rewind.
Today's topic, if it's not the Cold War, what is it? Cannot come at a more important time. I'm not a name caller, but certainly some have named Vladimir Putin a Russian Ayatollah, delusional, messianic, narcissistic, moralistic, brutal, or all of the above. But surely he's not, this I would agree with, not the cool, rational intellectual that defines Barack Obama. And that makes for a mutually difficult relationship, which is playing out in Ukraine, Syria, Iran, missile defense, and trade challenges, among other things.
The post-Cold War era has ended, but what is this now? Can the U.S. and Russia really cooperate on things? Does Russia even want to? Have we had the wrong assumptions about what Russia's wanted for the past 20 years?
There is no possibility of Russian control over Ukraine. There is absolutely no possibility Ukraine could in any way or in any imagination be a threat to Russia. And there is certainly an absolute necessity for Ukraine to be a country of majority rule but full observance of minority rights. But I am deeply concerned that if those elements or something like them are not kept in the picture, and if diplomacy is not part of the answer, then force will be.
I'm not ready, by the way, to pull the trigger on imposing sanctions because I think the conditionality we've laid out is way too ambiguous. I don't think they understand exactly what they need to do and what they need to not do. We've said, play a productive role, solve the problem, right? But in the longer term, we in the West have leverage over Kiev like we've never had before. The Ukrainian leadership was always able to play us against the Russians, was always able to say to us, give us money, help us out, and overlook all of our failures, because if you don't, we'll just go to the Russians. Well, guess what? They can't go to the Russians anymore. That option has, at least for now, been foreclosed. Now is the time when we extract from the Ukrainians the first steps towards real, long-term, systemic and institutional reforms, which, by the way, is what the Ukrainian people want.
And every time you talk about the collapse of the Soviet Union, people keep talking about how peaceful it was. It was not peaceful. And anybody sitting in this audience who remembers the 1990s and the wars in Moldova and Transnistria, in Abkhazia, in South Ossetia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and then in Chechnya, will remember that that was not the case. In fact, we're going back to that phase now, in some respects, in Ukraine. I don't know about other people here, and I see a lot of people sitting here in the audience who've been following all of this, but I feel like I'm back in the 1990s again when I see what's actually happening in Ukraine. And that's Putin's frame of reference. Putin actually saw, and he says it quite explicitly if you look at his speeches, that Russia has been in a struggle ever since the end of the Cold War. We're not in a new Cold War, there's just a new war that started that never really ended, which is about Russia's place. And over again, he has chosen, and others have chosen, different forms of military intervention. But we really have to create a mechanism and a framework, the kinds of things that Wolfgang Ischinger was looking for in the case of Ukraine and the dialogues. We need to have also a dialogue within Europe, because Russia is basically saying the definition of Europe that we have now with the institutions, the twin institutions of the EU and NATO, is not acceptable to Russia. So if we're going to be a player in Europe, we want something else. Now, what that something else is, of course, Putin isn't telling us. He's basically waiting for us to come up with some suggestions that he can either trash and discard, or that perhaps he can push along a bit and see what else we come up with.
For more information, visit wilsoncenter.org. Click the Programs tab to find additional resources from the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute and also the National Conversation.